I don't think anyone ever imagined that we would be touring studios via Zoom, but this is the time we live in, and this is what we have to do. So I'm excited that all of you have figured out how to Zoom with us, and it'll be a wonderful afternoon. And I would like to introduce the other members of the Heckscher that are here.
So hello everyone, my name is Christina Schaff. I'm the Director of Visitor Experience at the Heckscher Museum. And I'm just thrilled that we're able to run this program today. And I want to thank all three artists for joining us. And in a strange way, a studio tour via Zoom is fabulous because we don't have to drive all over Long Island to get stuck in traffic. So there you go. All about focusing on the silver linings. And Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Sayedi. I'm the lead educator at the museum and docent coordinator. I'm very excited to be a part of today's event and to see everybody's studio.
Okay, so I guess we're going to just dive right in. We have three incredible biennial artists that we will be visiting with this afternoon. And our first artist will be Philippe Cheng. He has a studio out in Bridgehampton. And Philippe is a fine art photographer with a strong connection to nature and light. He was born and raised in New York City, attended the School of Visual Arts and NYU. If he had to describe his artwork in 3 words or less, he would say emotional, explorations, and intuitive. Roshanak Keyghobadi, has a home studio in Syosset, New York. She describes herself as an artist, scholar, educator, and visual explorer. If she had to describe her artwork in 3 words, she would say playful, mindful, and inclusive. And our third artist that we'll be meeting this afternoon is Kristine Perelle. Her studio is in her home in Hale Site, which is part of Huntington. She is a 4th generation Danish American artist who started in advertising and production, with 25 years as a stylist, faux finisher, muralist, and ambiancer. She draws inspiration from a blend of artistic intuition, travel, nature, and a formal education at the New York School of Interior Design. If she were to describe her artwork in 3 words or less, it would be whimsical, poignant, and joyful.
So then we're going to begin with our first tour of Philippe Cheng's studio. So I'm going to go ahead, Philippe, and spotlight you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. First, I wanted to thank the Heckscher Museum and Joy and Christina and Lisa for arranging this. It's an honor to be a part of this exhibition. And as artists, I think, especially in this time, when you do have the ability to show work and speak about your work, it's very meaningful because we're all living in this little bubble right now. So I'm very grateful to the Heckscher and all the work they're doing to make this available to the public and to really champion artists of Long Island. So thank you. That's the first thing I really wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say, I'm going to show you a little bit around my studio. So I'm going to flip my camera around and do a little walkthrough on my phone so you can see what I'm doing. But I want to say that usually in the morning, I begin with an espresso. And I have my bottle of water. And that's kind of how my day begins after breakfast in terms of when I begin my studio practice in the morning. So I'm going to flip my camera around. Just give me a sec, if I can do that. And I'm going to show you my studio. And what you're looking at there is kind of it's a closet that has magnetic doors that I use magnetic paint. So I kind of use it as a display for myself with magnets and put new work up. And I'm just going to do a quick pan. And what you're looking at there are sandpaper prints that I'm currently working on, which are part of the biennial. And my studio space is connected to my living space, which is through those doors. So my wife, who's also an artist, we have 2 kids. And so when we were looking for a place and designing a place, we wanted to have a live-work situation. So just to give you an idea of, I don't have far to go in the morning from my studio. And I need from my creative life a sparse work environment. If it's too chaotic, I have trouble concentrating. So for me in particular, I do need a kind of order to be creative. And these are just some of the tools I work with, a little drill, a lot of rulers, a lot of cutting materials. And one thing I'm just going to do a quick little overview of is I had a book that came out of photographs about the eastern end of Long Island. And this is a special edition of the book that I made that had a little selection of prints, which I'll show you. And I'm very interested in bookmaking, and I'm thinking about this all the time when I'm working on projects, how it will become a book or not.
Philippe, if I may ask,
Sure.
when you took these photos, then were you envisioning it as a book, or was that decided later in the process?
After I took, we moved out to Long Island in the fall of 2001. And I started photographing immediately. And when I saw a couple of images, I thought, well, that's the soul of this place. And I have to do something with this. And so early on, I guess in early 2002, based on a couple of pictures, I knew it was going to be a book. And I just photographed from there on out. And it did take 15 years actually to complete the book.
Wow.
So, for me, it's not so much the time it takes, it's to get it right. And that's really sort of I have a realization that not everything comes together quickly. And some things do, but some things do need time. And is this view okay of viewing the book?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just give you a kind of little spin.
What kind of camera do you prefer to work with?
So 75% of these were photographed with a Hasselblad camera, which is a medium format square camera. And then because in the Hasselblad, when you focus, it's completely manual camera. When you change the focus field, you really see what you're doing. It doesn't remain in focus. It really shifts to it will look like what you're photographing. And so as I photographed over the years, I became very interested in color fields. So not necessarily to define what something is, but to speak about what the colors and what the landscape was making me feel. And so the abstraction really became something for me that was expressive and truly taught me how to see this environment. I'm very influenced by the poetry of E. Cummings. And in fact, he has a poem called Still, and which is on this page here. And you can see it's written in a non-linear kind of way. And for me, it's very much how I think, I guess, and how I photograph, that sometimes you don't have a straight path into understanding what you're doing. And part of the beauty of his poetry is that you have to work to read it, which I like. And he has a poem where he says, since feeling is first, who pays attention to the syntax of things? And for me, this is very much a guiding light, that as much as we try to have an idea of what something is or want to know what something is all the time, that the feeling is really, in the end, is what is important. And so this has been kind of my guiding principle in creating. And I'm just going to flip the camera back around. So, oh, that was close.
Philippe, we were interested in learning a little bit more about your sculptural work.
Sure.
We saw some of that in your panning of your space, and I was curious about when you started working sculpturally and how it connects to your photography in any way. If you could just elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to flip the camera around. They're difficult to show for some reason. Sorry, let me just see if I can. So, you know, for me, I am always searching to I'm always looking to make things more tactile. And so photography obviously is a very two-dimensional form. And I love, of course, I love photography, and I love two-dimensionality prints, but I've been looking and searching for a way to speak about it in a different way that really talks about my interests and the things that I'm influenced by. So obviously, when I'm a New York City kid, and when I moved here, I never thought I would garden or understand the landscape in any kind of meaningful way. But over the years, I've come to really appreciate it and been schooled day after day after day and humbled by the landscape. And I'll keep panning a little bit so you can see some of the other ones. And so in an effort to kind of find a different approach to photography that was maybe more three-dimensional, in the way that life works, I guess, I was in a hardware store and I saw this beautiful blue paper. And I thought, wow, that is really beautiful paper, because I'm really attracted to blue. And I'll just kind of come over to a little sample of that paper. That's like a corner of it, you can see. And then that's a print that I've made. And I kind of coincidentally, I was decommissioning a printer, and I thought I would try to make a print with this sandpaper. And when I did, it just hit me like a ton of bricks that, yes, this is where I should go. And so I started making sandpaper prints. And then I was looking as a way to hang them.
Can I ask a question about the
Yeah.
sandpaper print? So does that sandpaper actually goes through your printer?
Yes.
And how does that happen?
How does that happen?
Well, I
With
mean,
a lot of experimentation.
how does your printer feel about it? I guess I want to ask.
You know, I'm of the mindset that the printer is a tool, and that it's kind of the mystery of it. And I'm not so concerned about destroying the printer, because I view it as a transit point for creating. And so, you know, when I was decommissioning the printer, I didn't have fear of breaking the printer, because I thought, okay, well, if it's not working, then I won't, no harm, no foul. Mm-hmm. But since I've started printing on them, I have sandpaper only printers. So where I just use them for printing sandpaper. And one of the beauties of printing on sandpaper, you can see, I don't know if you can see in the detail there.
Yes.
That you can see how the ink is running through the grooves of the sandpaper, just at the edge. And if you made a regular photographic print, it'd be a clean line. But with the sandpaper, it's almost painterly in the sense that the ink is running. And that's something that I really love about it. And, you know, printing on any surface is always, for me, a challenge because you want to defeat the technology sometimes, and because it doesn't always work to what you're feeling. And so that's part of the challenge of it. And I try to think about it without fear. You know, if I'm going to lose a printer because I'm trying to figure something out, I'm willing to go there. You know, I just want to say one other thing about the steel mounted plates that I'm working with here. You know, for me, it's always this question right now of us knowing too much, and always all of us right now, of course, having an encyclopedia in our fingertips. And I like not knowing sometimes. And so what I like about these are, so on the front or the back, depending on what you would consider the front or back, there is one experience. And then to the surprise, or hopefully the surprise, on the back is another experience. And so, and these can be mounted on shelves or that kind of thing. So for me, this is what I'm really interested in right now, is trying to find a kind of analog experience, I guess is the best way I can put it, in terms of the photographic experience. I'm just gonna flip around. In the darkroom, it used to be, of course, when you made traditional prints, you would put the paper in the chemistry, in the developer, and out of a blank piece of paper, an image would arise. And this was also a beautiful moment because you never knew what to expect. And in the digital age, we've lost this feeling, and across multiple parts of our life, and I embrace it myself. I love knowledge, of course, and I love using the tools. But for me as an artist, I'm also searching for that mystery and that surprise, because I don't want the viewer always to know what's coming. And this to me is important as an artist, I think. Because feelings, getting back to E. Cummings, you know, as much as we know, again, it really comes down to what we're feeling in the end, right? You know, how much we love, how much we care, how much humanity we have. And I think that no matter what we create, you know, you can have the biggest building in the world, the biggest artifice, you know, all of it, but it doesn't mean anything without feeling. So I think, yes, for me, that's what I'm searching for and looking for and trying to use as inspiration for creating work.
Philippe, in terms of use of the computer, I mean, you were just talking about the traditional darkroom process. Now, of course, using the computer, do you digitally manipulate your photographs at all on the computer, or is it?
No, you know, I'll use it for, obviously, for transporting the image from, you know, I do use digital cameras, so, and I'll use it, I'm a big square person, so I'll photograph something rectangularly and then use the computer to crop it. And sometimes, depending on the image, I might shift it from color to black and white, depending on what I'm looking for. I'm more of a traditionalist in the sense that when I'm full of intention when I'm photographing, that I'm really trying to capture what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about, and using exposure in the camera and not thinking about doing it in post-production. But it's a tool for me. So yes, sometimes I will, but I don't view it as a guiding force for me. Like, oh, I'm going to photograph it this way and then I'll be able to shift the color to blah, blah. That I'm not thinking that way when I'm creating. I'm looking for the color that I'm looking for and then trying to retain it as best I can.
Do you photograph every day?
You know, like I'm photographing lots of things. Yes, almost every day. And, but it takes on different forms, you know, like right now, for example, the iPhone is an extraordinary camera. And I grew up in the analog world. We're using what was called the Diana camera, which is like a $25 plastic camera that had film. You could make beautiful, extraordinary images with it, or with the iPhone, you can. And so, you know, with the tools in our pocket now, yes, I'm photographing all the time, whether they're little vignettes or little still lives. But you know, it's an interesting question because professionally, there's so much pressure now to be socially media present, and it's an interesting, curious question how much you're contributing to the noise, the visual noise of the moment. How much of the how many of the pictures really have meaning, or is it, do you view it as a diary, a visual diary? You know, like I go through different stages. So I am photographing all the time, but I'm using them in different ways all the time, the images. So sometimes I'll be posting all the time, and sometimes I'll be taking a break because I'm just maybe fed up with my own self. So.
Thank you.
And just since you brought up social media, and of course now during the pandemic, all these digital platforms are, you know, coming to the surface in terms of being our main form often of communicating with others. Just thinking about the pandemic and how it's influenced everyone's work, how would you say, you know, being in this circumstance has impacted you? Has your work practice shifted in any way, changed?
Actually, we're living in such a political moment, and it's our duty right now to, as a visual artist, I think, I'll just speak for myself, to capture this moment in multiple ways. So the pandemic has led to several different projects that are both political and some are not, but I photo out east here, there have been several Black Lives Matter marches that have been organized by young people. And so I photographed in all the different towns, all of these marches. So I have a whole archive of these. Out east, there's a group of cultural art institutions called the Hamptons Art Network. And so I've done several portraits for these organizations, where someone will commission a portrait of a family or an essential worker. And then after expenses, all the money goes to these organizations. So I've done like 40 of them so far. And I'm currently actually doing a little film in the 10 days leading up to the election of visual portraits of women out here, which is a companion piece to another film I did in 2008. So, yeah, the pandemic for me is, actionable. It's not, I can't sit. What it comes down to, I suppose. I feel like it's incumbent upon me to try to do something that's meaningful. Hopefully. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So someone else will make that decision, whether it has meaning or not. But for me, I can only attempt to use my tools to capture what I see. And, 100 years from now, when they look at what was going on, I want to contribute to that archive in some form. And so that's been one of the things I've been thinking a lot about.
No, I think we learned a lot today, and I think you certainly gave us a lot of meaningful, personal thoughts, and how important all the things that you're doing are, and that's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. And really thank you to the Heckscher for making the effort to show artists' lives. And it's important, so thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. I wanted to thank you, Heckscher Museum of Art, for providing this opportunity for all of us to share our work. our space, and also creating this connection, a bridge between artists and the community, to have a dialogue and a conversation. So we're kind of connected in this time that we tend to disconnect. I also wanted to thank Joy, Christina, Carolyn, Carly, Christine, Jess, Jill, Lisa, and Deborah. All of you are wonderful, wonderful staff at the Hex Chair. I really appreciate all your help and guidance, and as I said, this connection that you created for us. As Joy mentioned, my studio is in Syosset. I have a home studio. Just like Philippe, my working space is connected to my living space. And I'm going to share my screen with you so you can have a little tour of my space. Okay, so there are two entrances to my workspace, one from outside and one from inside. So I can access my studio in two ways. And I work in different media. What you see here hanging is a typographic garment that I created, and I call it chat jame, which is a combination of Persian and English, meaning garment, chat garment. And this is basically my conversation with another artist that we did through Skype. And it is a garment without a person in it. It's just like when you're lacking the presence of another person. So I wrote on this whole garment, it's a combination of different dialogues. What I'm recently working on are photo montages, basically putting various images from different sources together and create a new image. And these are my bins here. You can see these are my materials for my photo montages, and my books and my sketchbooks. This whole shelf is my sketchbooks that I work with sketches. I have different sketchbooks for different materials and ideas. And these are my bins for all the materials that I need and collect to put them in one place. And every time that I need something, I'll go to it. And I find these are like little treasure boxes for me, that I can find the perfect thing that I'm looking for. A little piece of fabric, a little piece of paper, ribbons, or just type, wax paper, you name it, I have it in here. And this corner of my studio is basically some of my own work and some of my friends and family's work that I really like to put up. This is the view that I get from my studio. Good lighting, and two pieces of photo montage that I'm working on my station, my computer station. And then this is really the heart of my studio, the core, the two tables that I put together and where I work. It is divided to two these days because I'm teaching from home. I teach at Farmingdale State University, and this side of my desk is dedicated to my teaching. I also teach Zoom classes, art classes on Zoom. So all my materials for teaching are in this side, and everything else related to my collages and photo montages are at this side. Now this desk is really clean and clear right now where you're seeing it, but usually it's chaotic, and it's a playground for me. And this is basically my space.
Roshanak,
Yes.
Can I ask, you have a background in graphic design, I understand. So how does that affect this work that you're showing us today and what you're exhibiting in the museum?
Okay.
And how did you transition? I'm just curious about that relationship between the two different.
That's a great question. Let me switch back to the works that I actually am showing at the museum, and I can explain it better with that. These are the two works that I have at the museum, and the connection that I can make is I'm a graphic designer by training, and I'm very used to ordering information, constructing grids, and gathering visuals and words in a way that it makes sense. Anything that I design as a graphic designer should be clear, should be to the point, and easily understood. When I was introduced to papermaking, when I was an undergraduate at Philadelphia College of Art, now it's called University of the Arts, I took a class in papermaking and I just fell in love with it. And the reason was because it was so different from what I knew as a graphic designer. The nature of the papermaking, the chaotic nature of it, that you would just put the pulp in water and the pulp sits on the screen, you lift it up, and you don't have any control over anything that sits on the screen. You can move things around a little bit, but basically it does what it does. And as soon as I incorporated and experimented with different textures and maybe putting images, mixing images and type, newspaper clippings and magazine clippings into that pulp, it even became more chaotic, kind of out of hand, dynamic, very organic. So again, that was very exciting for me. And then when I pulled up the pulp and it was sitting on the screen, and then pressing it and drying it, it was very different from what I would usually put together as a graphic designer. So I embraced that. I kept making paper with embedded images in it, embedded type in it. And I became very interested in the connection between language and the interpretation of the language. I started this series in Persian. I would actually ask my aunt in Iran to send me magazines, and I would tear them up and put them in pulp and would work with it. These two pieces that you see, some of the paper has the pulp in it, like the images in pulp, and some of it doesn't. So basically, these are my latest works. These are much larger than I usually work with. I work in smaller format because of the limitation of the space that I have. I make paper at home, so I use smaller screens and I piece them together. I piece my paper together. You can see these are like all pieced together. And then I use thread as my tool and stitching as my drawing technique, and stitch all of these little bits and pieces together. I don't do embroidery. I just use thread as my pencil, as my drawing tool. And you can see actually my graphic design training just forces itself back into my work. Within that chaos, I create grids again, I make connections, and I kind of like structure my composition in that way. Both of these trainings inform each other. They have a conversation. The designer in me and the collage artist in me they're at work together. So I can also show you my materials that I use. This is basically a piece of backing that I pieced together. These are all handmade paper from different sources. Most of them I made, some of them I purchased, or they're my friends' papers that they made. And I also experiment with different materials. Book pages. This is a piece of a rice bag that I use as a backing. My tools are very simple: scissors, needles, embroidery, thread, and basic materials, newspapers, Persian magazines, and calligraphy. These are some of my calligraphy pieces. And then I put them together. And sometimes I have a plan, sometimes I don't. I start looking at what I have and put them together. As you can see, I use pencil to draw my guiding lines, and I just sew on top of my lines. And I have this is a very short video of what I do.
I see you tearing the paper. Do you prefer torn edges
Yes.
over cut? Yeah.
Yes, I like the rough edges. Sometimes I cut it if I'm using it as like a grid element, but I really like the ragged edges and the feeling of the material. I really like working with different textures and materials. I just recently got into a lot of different colors, but before I limited myself to just few colors because I truly believe that with limitation you get freedom. You can experiment more and don't get overwhelmed with distracting ideas. So
Where did the stitching come from?
what do you mean, where did the stitching?
Well, how did you start to include stitching in your work?
Well, it is interesting because my mom sews, and since the very beginning, as far as I remember, she's been sewing different things, and I would sit by her side and I would just play with the fabrics and the threads and needles and just put things together. So she never showed me how to do it, but I learned it by looking at her. I mean, I would just ask her how you do it. I cannot sew like her, but I felt very comfortable. And because it's, I wanted to put fabric together at some point, that was the more logical tool to use, just stitching. And then I said, why not paper? Can I sew on paper? And then I started sewing on paper. And sometimes it's easy when it's thinner. Sometimes it's harder when I make handmade paper, it becomes thick. So I would make holes in my paper first, and then I start stitching the lines. So that's where it comes from. It has always been with me. I just rediscovered it through the need for how to put things together, and that was one way of doing it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If I could ask another question, actually. So I'm just really interested about like all of the different materials that you use for your collages and montages. So I saw when you were showing us the tour of your space that you have all of those boxes filled with all the different things that you have. Typically, when you're gathering materials for a new work of art or a new project, do you specifically go and look for things once you have an idea in your head, or are you constantly just being inspired as you're in the world and, you know, getting found objects?
Yes, I I have an idea, but the whole art making for me is a process. So I start with the base, and then I keep looking at my work, and I work on different parts of the piece. I may need a little bit of red here, so I look for something red. I may need some texture somewhere else, so I look for that texture. And I use whatever that I have. So a lot of times I may not even use any of those materials, and with the few things that I have around me, I just reuse them and work with that. But I really don't plan for a lot of these. They happen. They're happy accidents for me. They're like, I discover them and I'm happy.
I love that. I love that. And so actually, now that you said that, I have one more question for you. So saying how you know, just it's like fun things, or, you know, it just comes to you. Are you ever working on multiple projects at once, or do you kind of dedicate yourself to one thing at a time?
No, I do. I do work on multiple projects if they're smaller, and they become series kind of, because I take a little bit of this from here and put it over there. And another thing that I do is I revisit my old work. I have works that have been evolved from one stage to another, and at some point I had someone writing an article about one of my pieces, and that piece doesn't exist anymore because I changed it. So I mean, if she asks me again, I don't have it. It's another, it has another look. So I revisit my work. I sometimes I rip apart my work and I use some part of it in another work. So I don't limit myself. I give myself freedom to do whatever that I want to do with my work. So I'm in charge of it. So I keep changing it.
That's fantastic. It sounds liberating in a way, because I know many artists who, they, you know, once their work is done, it's like very sacred, and it, you know, it goes into storage or it's not touchable. So it's sounds like a very freeing experience, the way that you're able to express yourself.
And sometimes when I work, I hit a point that I can't see what else is needed. I know something's missing, but I don't know what. So the wall that I have in my studio is my tool to refocus and give me perspective. I put it up. Sometimes I just put aside my work. I don't look at it for a while. And just that distance and time gives me more perspective to look again and find what was missing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Roshanak, I'm curious about teaching and how that has impacted your work. Like, how long have you been teaching for, and how has that connected with your own production?
That's a great question. I've been teaching for a long, long time. I've been teaching to different age groups, to like little kids, and to a lot of different age groups. So I learned from all of them, even from, I mean, that sense of freedom, I really got it from watching kids doing what they're doing. But my teaching really informs my practice. In my private classes, I work alongside my students. So whatever project that I give them, I do it myself. And that's how I also explore new ideas. So at the university also, my students are like between like 18 to 20 something. So their ideas are always very interesting to me. And when we do critiques, their suggestions are really good. So definitely it impacts my view and the way that I look at everything. And even materials that my students sometimes find and use, they're really inspiring. So I say, oh, I really want to use this too. Like, where did you find it? Or I want to do it. So I do that. Yeah, definitely.
Excellent. Great. Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Roshanak. This is fabulous.
Thank you.
Hi guys, welcome to my studio. And I would also like to thank everybody at the Hexture for putting on such an amazing show. So many great artists, and I feel very privileged to be amongst all those artists. And thank you for everybody coming out to see the show. And for those of you today watching the studio tour. So as Joy mentioned, my studio is in my home. It's about a mile north actually of the Heckscher Museum. I have a very interesting story about the house itself. It was originally a boathouse built in 1902 in Connecticut. And in about 1920, they put it on a barge and brought it across the Long Island Sound to Huntington Harbor, where it sat in the harbor as a warehouse for a number of years. And then eventually they dragged it up the hill about a quarter of a mile out from the harbor here. And so it's a 3-story house, and the studio is it's on the top floor. It's the northwest corner of the house, and it's not very big. It's like 10 by 12. And I get sort of afternoon light, but that doesn't really affect what I do because, one, I'm a night owl and I'm more creative at night. And a lot of the work that I do, I'm a decorative painter, a mural artist normally, and that brings me to the job site. So, and a lot of the equipment and supplies that I use for that work sits in my garage because it's ladders and paints, big cans of paint and stuff like that. So, but I do have other supplies in here because I do all kinds of art. I mean, I like to experiment with all different kinds of mediums. But I think I'll give you a quick little tour of the room itself. It will be very quick because, like I said, it's not that big a room. So I'm going to switch the camera around here. Okay, so I'm going to sit back here and show you this is a drafting table that I inherited, and I used to go to interior design school many years ago, and that came in handy. And I like it because you can lift it up and down, you can stand at it, you can sit at it. And that's where I do most of my crafting. So that's the east facing window right there. And to the left of my desk are just a mixture of, pens and pencils and glues and things like that. This is a little dormer window, which faces the front. That's the west facing part of the house. Down here, I have a ton of paintings, mostly of which I have inherited, or as Joy said, I'm the 4th generation artist. So a lot of these paintings were paintings done by my grandmother and my great aunt. And there's just so many, and I just don't have the space to hang them all. So occasionally I'll just switch things out around the house. But so some of them are living here. Here I have an easel set up. This is one of the latest pieces that I did during the quarantine. Then this is behind, let me back up. This is behind the drafting table behind me. And this is a bookshelf with obviously art books and reference books where I get inspiration. Some of the artists that I love. I love artists like Gustav Klimt and Paul Gauguin. And there's some other modern day artists, which I'll share with you later because it inspired some of the work that I did. But down below are just some sketchbooks and little canvases, watercolor papers, things like that. And then in these bins are a bunch of, fabrics and scissors and all kinds of things for collaging and that kind of thing. So spin around here. That's a painting that my mother did. And this is the interior wall back here. That's a photograph that I took from a trip that I took to Morocco about 6 years ago, and some friends of mine enlarged it and gave it to me for my birthday. So that was very special. And this is a childhood dresser where I keep a lot of material and some extra paints and just more craft supplies. So that's the grand tour of my studio space. Get back over here. So to give you a little history, I was born in Florida. My dad was in the Air Force. And so we got moved around a lot, and we got transferred to Germany and then transferred to Alabama. And my parents split up, and my sister, my mother and I moved to Hawaii, where my grandmother was living and working as a textile stylist. And then we moved to Santa Barbara, California. And finally we moved to Long Island in the late 70s. And I went to college I went to a junior college in Boston. It was a visual arts school. And then a liberal arts school, and I studied visual arts. Then I came back to New York, and I started my career in advertising. I started as a secretary, and I worked my way up into the production department, and I produced TV and radio commercials. And I was with the agency for about 13 years. And for the last 2 years, while I was there, I went to interior design school. So after I finished design school, I left advertising, and I went into the family business with my mother, doing decorative painting, mural painting. And I'm going to share just a couple of images because to this day I still do murals and faux finishes. So let's see, bring up some of my photos here. Sorry about this. I thought I was going to do the gallery view. Got the wrong one here. Okay, so here's one image. That's a floor that I did out in West Hampton. This Compass Rose. It was one of the first interior design jobs that I did, and I also did this painting. Let's see if I can get back to the photos that I wanted to share. Okay, so I'm not getting the screen that I wanted, but here's another image that I did. This is, you may know, in Centerport, there's a camp. It's the oldest Catholic day camp called Camp Alvernia, and this is the friary. So I did the walls in that place. So that was a good project. So that kind of work I still do, but and then over the last couple of years, I've really wanted to start doing work for myself, because most of the artwork that I had been doing up until that point was client driven. So I just started experimenting with all different kinds of mediums, watercolors and pastels and that kind of thing. So and that kind of stuff you can go and see on my Instagram account. There's many images you can see. But so in March, when everything started shutting down, I was looking for an appropriate way to express my creativity, because I wasn't feeling inspired to paint anymore. And so I was looking at something. It was a Getty Museum was putting on this challenge. The Getty Museum is in LA. It's one of my favorite museums. And they were proposing a challenge whereby you pick a famous piece of art or any piece of art, and using items in your home, recreate that work of art. So I love a challenge, and I love art. So I thought this would be a lot of fun. So what I did was, to start my search to get inspired, I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art's gallery and started looking for a piece. And I came across a charcoal by Ray Dawn. And to me, it was a striking image that I just felt portrayed what had sort of been thrust upon us here in New York. So I'm going to bring up this image for you. And let's see, where is the one? Again, bear with me a second here. Okay, here's the image. So obviously Ray Dawn's image is on the left and mine's on the right. And so what I did was I knew immediately that I could recreate this image. Not only did it speak to me, but I knew that I had the items that I needed to recreate it. So I went and gathered my turtleneck sweater and my black beanie hat, and then I had this other sweater that had feather, lining around the collar, and I draped that around my head. And I went down into the living room and I hung a sheet in the doorway. And I think I did this one was with a self timer. I put a chair down and I had this thing that you use in the car to hold your cell phone. And I just set the self timer up and took a bunch of photos and then threw it into the layout app. And I also took this challenge a little bit of a step for, I created another challenge for myself by giving it a new title. So the image, the charcoal by Ray Dawn is called Armor. And I named my piece Masquerader. So, so I did about 30 of these recreations. I was posting them on my social media and getting a very positive response, and people were enjoying them, and that was energizing me to continue. Like I said, sorry, go ahead.
Do you have the one with your dog also?
Well, yeah, I was kind of gonna end with that because
okay.
But yeah, I could share those.
I like that you took it one step further.
Okay, all right. So just since you brought it up, I'll share it. So after I did all these other images, I was again on social media, Instagram, which I tend to love quite a bit, and I follow some dog accounts, and specifically I love long-haired dachshunds. And I found one that I follow that, or actually that wasn't the dog, it was a little Maltese, and it had a mask on and it reminded me of my image. So I made a little triptych and I called it Doppelganger, and I'll bring up the image. Let's see here. Here we go. There's the Doppelganger.
Love it.
So, and I've done it with a few other of the pieces that I recreated. But I wanted to share some of the other recreations and sort of the process. You know, I tried to pick pieces that conveyed what we were going through at the time. So, you know, and I wanted to pay tribute to certain things. But here's one. I don't know if you know the artist Peter Beard, but he died during quarantine, and this is one of his photographs. And so this one I did not have, obviously I didn't have a frame like that, so I had to make that frame. So I took just a plain frame that I had, and I took some red wrapping ribbon and I wrapped it around the frame, and then I painted some black paint over it, and then took a little silver pen and made those little crackle marks.
Oh, so that's a physical frame? I was curious if you did that digitally or...
No, I did not manipulate any of my images. And also all of the props that I used to recreate these images, I did not purchase. I didn't go outside. I used everything that I physically had in my house. And if I didn't have it, I made it. So this is a prime example of that. And I didn't digitally manipulate any of these. Let's see here. I'll show you a couple other ones. Okay, so I'm so bummed out this didn't come out in the way I wanted, but this was for Memorial Day. So the image on the left, I'm trying to remember the name of the painting at the time, but it was, you know, to in memoriam of those that had died in World War II. And this is one of the few images where I went outside the house to take the picture. But again, you know, I used everything that I had in my house to recreate it.
So you made the cross and the.
Oh yeah, I made it with I had cardboard box at home, so I brought that with me. Yeah. And well, I have to say those two sticks there, those were on the beach. I just moved them. But that might be the only one where I didn't have the item.
I'm curious, Kristine,
Yeah.
you've made so many of these. Like, which one, if you had to pick one, which one do you think was the trickiest one to do? Like the most.
Oh, the trickiest one. Yeah. Well, there's tricky and then there's very involved and there's both. I'll show you. Okay, so this one was tricky. This one is by an artist that I found at the was an art show at the Jacob Javits Center. Her name is Agata Sarmat, and she does these beautiful paintings with epoxy, and she uses crystals. And her painting here is called Water Ecstasy, and I called mine Quarantine Agony. But this one I did on the floor here in my studio, and it took me about a week to lay out all of the items, and I can show you because I think I took a picture of the setup before I took the photo. So here's one example. So it's just, laying everything out, and then I would take a picture of it and put it in layout to see that everything was, similar in space. And then that's just a bunch of beads and necklaces and shells and that kind of thing. And so it took a long time to procure all that stuff. And then to get my head in the shot, that was tricky. I'll show you. I had to contort my body. So I was in actual agony taking this, but so I had to, pull my arm back, and I had my husband help, set this up because he had to stand on a stool and take the picture, right above me. So that one was very time consuming and a little painful. So that's one example. And then there's another one that I did for, here it is. I'll show you the final. So this one was Emma Amos, who also passed away recently. She was a very famous African-American artist. And the image on the top is called Equals, and mine is on the bottom for Unequals. And this was during the whole, Black Lives Matter, and this is about racial equality. And I did this one down in my living room, and I'll show you the setup for that. So it's a drop cloth on the floor in my living room. And then I just had to go around searching for things that I had that were red. So I have like being Danish, I have a bunch of Danish flags, which has a lot of red in it. So I was able to fold some of those up. And then I don't know if you can see on the bottom right, I have some pot holders. That's down on the bottom right. And then, so this is starting the making of the stripes in the flag. And I think I have one more with the setup. Here we go. So, on the top left, that's just a drawing that I had on the wall in the living room. And then I cut out all those black, the stars, construction paper. And that was another difficult one to have photographed. My husband had to help me with that one. Some of them I could do self-timer, some of them I needed to enlist the help of my husband. And this is one of those, again, where he's, I think, standing on a step ladder and shooting down on me. So yeah, that was a difficult one. But they were a lot of fun to do. It kept me very it gave me a purpose during lockdown, you know, and it got me to stretch my brain, and I was bringing joy to people. People were asking for more, and it was a great experience. And so I continued on. I'll show you a couple more. Actually, Patton Miller, who was one of the curators of the show, he's one of my favorite artists, and I did a couple of recreations of his. Here's one called The Welder on the top, and mine on the bottom is called Weld Done. And I don't know if you can see on the bottom left there, I used it's like an African basket, and I put a belt sander, and I have like a power cord and in my hands, a hedge clipper and a pickaxe. And then on my head, I have a box that I glued my iPad onto, and I had those googly eye glasses, and that was a fun one. And, you know, when I was sitting out in front of the house and my husband was photographing me, we had a good laugh with that one. It was a fun one to do.
Kristine, I'm curious, because this all started during the pandemic, and do you envision like continuing the series for, you know, the foreseeable future? Do you envision it perhaps evolving in some way?
Yeah, good question. As time went on, I mean, I was doing these I was recreating about every 2 days. And then as time has gone on, and things started opening up, the fewer I started doing. I noticed that I didn't have that need to do it. And I also, I just didn't know how far to take it. And it just kind of happened organically, where I just sort of stopped when I got, because I was on furlough during this time. I have a part-time job that I had to go back to also. So it just didn't seem like necessary in a way for me. Like I wasn't closed in, and I didn't have to occupy my time that way. But I've had a lot of people asking me to put a book together of this whole collection. So that is something that I am currently working on. And beyond that, I don't know that I will continue with it. It's just sort of happening organically for me in that regard.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So I was curious, more towards the beginning of when you were talking, you were mentioning that as quarantine happened, you really lost the inspiration to paint, and then this organically came up where you approached this. So would you say that as we kind of started going back to more the normal part of our lives and things opened back up, that your inspiration for painting came back a little bit, or are you still more towards doing photography and this kind of work?
Yeah, I haven't, as most artists know, it's a luxury to be able to create. And having gone back to work, I don't feel like I have that much space in my daily life to create. I do have the desire a little bit more to start creating. It's not necessarily painting either, because like I said, I enjoy all different kinds of mediums. I love doing collages. And that actually, it was like 2 nights ago, I was here at the desk, and I don't know, it's got a little spark of inspiration. I threw on some music, which I tend to like to listen to music while I'm working. And I was just making a little collage. I just took out some of my magazines and started cutting stuff out and laying things out. And I didn't finish anything, but it was just another direction, creative direction.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Does anyone have any further questions for Kristine? Well, Elizabeth?
It's not so much a question, it's what they were talking about. I think during this time in the art we created, this is the time. I think as it goes on, like you said, you start getting busy. it doesn't have the impact maybe emotionally as it did. Like I know myself as an artist, the illustrations I did when we were really, New York was really imploding. You don't get that again, thank God, that horrible time. But it's interesting the art that we created in the throes of it. And I don't think we, like in a year, I don't think my illustrations or my paintings will look like that because I don't have that emotional connection. And I know I've seen a lot of your pieces and they were phenomenal and they did help us get through this.
Thank you.
Are you, I have a comment and a question.
Mhm.
Are you, Kristine? My name is Barbara Stein. Hi, how are
Hi,
you?
Barbara.
Hi. I always was very taken with the large format photography of Cindy Sherman. Are you familiar with her from way back and still
Yes.
practicing?
Yeah.
We're still, And you know how she would take on a persona? She was always the one in her pictures, but each one you could swear was not her anymore, but they were her.
Yeah.
So I thought it a little bit reminded me of your, you're inspired by these different works but it's you in each one of the
Recreations,
the recreations.
reinterpretations, you're not the first person to say that. There are a couple other people that mentioned that as well. And I never really, I guess each piece sort of is a little bit of me, obviously,
Sure.
because I had to be, it was what I was feeling, and the images that I chose, I had to be attracted to those.
Sure.
So yeah, it obviously hit some sort of emotional connection for me, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, great. So any other final questions for Kristine? Okay, so thank you so much, Kristine. This was fabulous.
Thank you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Good.
It was fun.
Joy, did you want to make some final comments?
Yes, I want to thank all the artists for participating today. I also want to thank, I noticed that we have a number of other biennial artists who are here. And so I'm really pleased that each of you can see one another's work in both the museum as well as in a more personal way by really experiencing, part of their studio and how they go about creating. It really makes such a difference in helping to understand how a work of art comes to be and what's behind a work of art. I always love the opportunity to speak to an artist and really have a personal look at what's important to them. So I thank all of you. I also want to mention that next Sunday will be our next studio tour. So if you haven't signed up for that, please do. And we'll be visiting the studios of Danielle Lavodi, a painter, and Thomas Germano, a painter as well. Very, very different. So it should be a really interesting and dynamic discussions. Roshanak is going to be doing an Instagram takeover for the museum on Wednesday, November 4th. So that will happen throughout the day. So please tune in on our Instagram account. And again, you will be getting to see many more of her works of art. And Kristine and Philippe will be the artists in the gallery next Friday, November 6th. So you can see their work in person. You can talk with them some more. And please invite your friends to come and support the museum. And we love these opportunities. So we thank you all very much for being part of this special day.